Let's talk about a character design concept I call crowd control. If you're designing characters, you've probably heard like, oh, have a readable silhouette, have bold color choices, have distinct traits, whatever, right? But let's talk about this from the other end. If your character stands out from the crowd, what's the crowd? By changing the attributes of the crowd, you can change what aspects of your character stand out. This is a very valuable tool, so let's talk about it. We'll start with elves. We've seen 1,000 elves. We have an imaginary elf in our head, a crowd of them, and they're all basically Tolkien elves, long blonde hair, live in the woods, do magic, live forever. That's a pretty stereotypical elf. So if you want to have elves that stand out from the crowd, you can do something like what Dragon Age does. Dragon Age wanted to have elves that are not high elves. They are elves that live in squalor. They're a marginalized group. And to really hammer that home, they designed the main elf characters to very clearly not be elfy elves. They have very visual characteristics and personality traits that don't really match with our concept of elf, which allows them to stand out. So, for example, we've got the bald elf. Spoilers on him, he's not an elf. We've got the tattoo-covered gothy elf. He's so grim. And then we've got the elf with the terrible bowl cut, who talks nonsense all the time. So, these elves are all unique, and they don't really fit into the elven mold. That's what gives the Dragon Age elves their impact, the fact that we are comparing them to our expectation of what an elf should be, the crowd in our head, the crowd of elves that we imagine. Now, obviously, as Dragon Age went on and gained in popularity, the crowd became more the Dragon Age elves, which were very specific category of elves, and then this character had to be compared to the Dragon Age elves, and this character had to be compared to the Dragon Age elves, not just elves in general. So the idea of an elf evolved as the games went on and the crowd started to change. But the concept is still here. By having a character that stands out from the crowd, you can leave a larger impact. So if you can control the crowd, you can control how much the character stands out. Basic idea, right? And this is not new. D&D has like 12 different kinds of elves. It's the same idea. Oh, look, it's a lunar fire elf. It's a specific version of an elf that stands out from the elf crowd that we have in our Tolkien-filled little head. So you can see that this basic idea has been done many times, and each time it works because none of those ideas is big enough to distort the fundamental concept of an elf. It's pretty strongly wedged in there. Let's talk about a different approach. Let's talk about Lodos Wars. Now, I'm sure all of you are good little anime fans who have seen Lodos Wars several times, but if not, it is a D&D game. Someone made an anime about your D&D game. It's about a bunch of rugged old guys, or rugged, guys of all ages, sweatily wandering around looking for magic swords and witches and dragons. Pretty typical stuff. But one of those party members is not a gross guy. It is an elf, Deedlit, the only woman in the group and the only elf in the story at all. So Deedlit is an elf, and she looks a little bit like this. And basically, she is like the example of a 90s elf. All of the stuff that you would think of in the 90s as elfy, she has. And the way that this works is that she's not being compared to other elves. She doesn't stand out from the crowd of elves. Because there's no crowd of elves. She stands out from a bunch of sweaty dudes. That's the whole point. She's not standing out from the elves because they changed the target of the crowd. They changed it so that the crowd she's standing out from is this group of dudes that she's wandering around with. And to do that, they actually made her blend into the concept of elves to the point where you wouldn't think, oh, how unusual an elf. No, you would just think that is the elf. That is the absolute example of elfness, and therefore we don't think about how she varies from our standards of elf. We don't have to, because she doesn't. She varies from our standard of sweaty adventurer dude. When Lodos Wars decides to bring in more elfy sorts, they actually bring in drow instead of elves. So they compare her to drow, and obviously she stands out from drow as well. They never really bring in proper elves, because that would water her down. What I'm pointing out here is that you can change the crowd you're standing out from. If you build an elf, you don't have to stand out from the crowd of elves. You can stand out from something else. But in order to do that, you have to carefully control what the player is perceiving as your background crowd. You have to control who you're standing out from. Let's get a little bit technical. You're generating all of London, and you can hire anybody in London to help you do your hacking schemes. Just all day, every day, people in London ready to help you hack the po-po or whatever. So, unfortunately, this crowd is kind of mushy. Like, nobody stands out. You're generating all of London, and therefore you have a bunch of Londoners. And it's just this noise. There's not really any reason to prefer one person over another or anything like that. Well, maybe you add in some uniqueness. Like, oh, this person wears a giant top hat, and therefore he is the interesting person in this crowd. But you're basically just making people that don't work. They're like people that wouldn't actually exist. Oh, look, here, this person wanders around painted in gold all day. Sure, that's realistic, right? So the worst part about that is, as you reuse these distinctive elements, they become non-distinctive. They start to become the crowd. This becomes something that's, the guy in gold stands out from real-world Londoners, but he doesn't stand out from the guy in silver and the guy in green in your video game version of London. So as you use these traits, they become part of the crowd that we expect to see, and therefore they stop standing out. This is why all of your generated stuff, characters, planets, levels, whatever, feels like oatmeal. But we can control the crowd. You have just generated a random little old lady. Here she is. Oh. And you can tell that this is a powerful tool because the random little old lady sold the game, right? Lots of people bought the game specifically because of random little old lady. Of course, random little old lady doesn't stand out very much in London. She's one of a million random little old ladies. In the trailer, she stands out because she pulls out a shotgun and kills somebody. So she stands out from the crowd of people you expect to pull out shotguns and kill somebody. She stands out from the crowd of mercenaries and warriors and video gamey buff types. But in the video game world, she's just one of a million little old ladies, right? She doesn't have to be, though, does she? You know that she's a little old lady. Generate a character set that doesn't have any little old ladies in it. So she's the little old lady, sure. And her crowd that she's standing out from is a bunch of huge bodybuilder thugs. Does she control them? Is she in danger from them? Either way, she stands out from the crowd, and the player will immediately notice that she is not just a little old lady. She is the little old lady, right? So by changing the crowd, you will allow her to stand out. And the best part about this is you also allow the huge people to stand out here too, because they get to stand out by how they interact with the little old lady. This allows them to interact with a group we don't normally assume they would interact with. And therefore, we get to understand a little bit more of their character traits. Is one of them really, really nice to the little old lady? Is one of them like talking about his own grandma? These things allow us to adjust the entire crowd. And it supports not only the distinctiveness of the little old lady, but also the character building of the crowd itself. This is a very powerful tool. So you're not generating characters randomly. You're not generating a crowd and hoping the player picks someone out of that crowd, because that's not going to happen. The crowd is just going to be oatmeal. You generate a focal point, and then you decide the rest of the crowd. Fun idea, right? I just wanted to go over this basic concept here. Control the crowd, and you control how a character is interpreted. That's it. Have a good day.